Welcome to the Quantum City Initiative, a show about the most important stories, ideas at the intersection of AI, cities, real estate, and the leaders shaping the future of how and where we live and work. Do you save and reinvigorate cities, or are you building new ones?
What is most critical for cities in the future with this sort of AI factory race that we're in? All right, EP 22, the QCI show. We're here. It's a wonderful day. Real feel in Boston is negative 14 degrees or something like that, but it's going to get hot in here. Why, Chase? Just the two of us today, man. We had two amazing shows back to back with guests. It's just us. How you doing today?
I just dropped my kids off at school. It is terrible out there, freezing. My garage door is frozen shut.
Oh, that's cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's logistics and stuff that we got to figure out here in the Northeast. But hey, just us today, which is a bummer because that means you're going to have to hear a lot more from us, because the last two guests we had, Steve Weichel, amazing speaker, and then Marwan took us on a journey. Check those two shows out. First two guests that we've had, we had a lot of fun with them. Went into productive cities, went into retrofits, invisible tech, golden metrics, which is exciting. But today we're back to our sort of regularly scheduled program. Got a couple of big stories. I forget what we call them, big hits. We got a couple of quick hits, do some Rex deep dives, and then obviously one more bit of news, which should be fun. Before we get into the show notes, a couple of quick hits that I'm going to just discuss here with you. SpaceX IPO tease. A lot of story about Tesla this week. Whether or not SpaceX is going to merge with Tesla and all that. But the most exciting thing I saw for SpaceX was the timing around the IPO. Mr. Musk wanted to do it around both his birthday and around planetary alignment. What do you think about that?
He's a PR and marketing maestro. I've been reading about there's rumors that SpaceX could merge with either Tesla or XAI. Obviously, all of the kind of fans of Elon are very vocally promoting this on X because their argument is synergies between the companies. And then when you think about if you want shares in Elon Inc., one security rather than multiple securities is better for people. I haven't dug too much into it, but like it has always seemed like he was trying to create, there's so much overlap between, look, he did it with Solar City that he merged into Tesla. Obviously the teams are very well known for working across the different enterprises. AI plays a part in both Tesla and SpaceX, so XAI naturally fits into that. I'm sure there's validity to it.
Can't imagine he's not working on it. Why not consolidate the 3 trillion plus business empire? But also out of Tesla news this week, they are apparently, and you're a Tesla guy, they're going to halt production of the Model X, which is the fly wing doors, and the Model S, which is the super fancy sedan, in favor of not more cars, more robots.
Yeah, I have a Model 3, which is the cheap version. I really liked it when I first got it.
Ooh, this is interesting.
Yeah. The car itself is great. The software is cool, but the self-driving, I don't know if it's a Massachusetts thing, but it used to be very good at self-driving. You know that the technology for self-driving has gotten better, but it must be regulatory. Anytime I have it on self-driving, it beeps and yells at me so much, basically being like, hey, why aren't you driving? And I'm like, isn't that the point of self-driving? So the usefulness of that application has gone down for me over time, which is unfortunate, but it does have a really cool feature. It was cool for about a day, but it's got a feature where you can, essentially select the mode. So you can do Tron mode or these different things that my kids love. And they had a Santa mode that when you see the cars from the camera on the dash, it turned them into reindeers and sleigh, but then it jingles every time you do the turn signal. So like the first time that was cool, but my middle son wanted it on all the time. So that got a little old.
I get it. Sleigh ride. It's all right. So maybe you're coming back to the combustion engine. which I love, near and dear to my heart. Breaking news as we film this show. Not necessarily. There's two bits of news here. One, first bit, interest rates stayed the same this week, Chase. The market that we were in, commercial real estate, obviously heavily influenced by the Fed and, of course, the interest rates. We know that Mr. Trump is on the warpath or on a mandate to lower interest rates. So that was earlier this week. Interest rates remained unchanged. However, just this morning, so it'll be a couple of days since you see this show, President Trump has nominated former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh to serve as the next Fed chair. The U.S. Central Bank, the transition obviously will start. Jerome Powell had his run. His term expires in May 2026. This news obviously just came out. It'll be a couple of days since, so you guys, I'm sure, will read about it. What does this mean, Chase, for commercial real estate? What are your thoughts here? What's your quick take, obviously?
From everything that I've read about Warsh, I think he's a good pick. He's got a kind of good balance between capital markets and working within government. He was a special assistant to George W. Bush. He previously worked at the U.S. Treasury. Hank Paulson was the commencement speaker at Hamilton right around the time of the great financial crisis while I was there. And I remember the speech was terrible. And I was like, this guy's a really big deal. Surprising that this wasn't a good speech. And then later, obviously, when the great financial crisis started to hit, it was like, oh, he had some other things on his mind. So that kind of checked out. But Warsh was also an M&A banker at Morgan Stanley. So he's not necessarily the academic economist, a little bit more tied into the markets. And from a policy perspective, I tend to align with some of his views. He's skeptical of excessive quantitative easing. I think a lot of people get hung up on only a few of the levers when we think about policy, and QE tends to be one that I think the broader population doesn't follow, but we had way too much QE for a period of time there. He's also very strong on Fed independence, which has been a hot button topic, obviously, with some of what are perceived to be strong-handed tactics. And I do think that Fed independence is important. So
so do you think that, this isn't a sort of financial show, but with that Fed independence speak, we know that obviously Mr. Trump has waffled back and forth a little bit on that. We know he's been heavy-handed with Jerome Powell. Him nominating, is that just a little bit of a signal, a little bit of a virtue signal? Do you think that Warsh will keep that Fed independence? Do you think that President Trump had, cut a deal with him here? I feel like Warsh, the first thing he does is going to slash interest rates pretty aggressively, as that's what President Trump has on his mandate.
I'm pretty sure that anybody that's getting nominated would have gone in and made a sound case for why we should be cutting interest rates. Now there's significantly more inputs like the QE one and certain things. So I'm sure it's much more sophisticated than simply, okay, I'll give you a quarter point when I get in or whatever. But I think with regards to Fed independence, there's no point in arguing. Each side of the political aisle is staunchly stuck in their position. The people on the left right now are saying that Trump's being way heavy-handed and arguing that he's going to take away independence. And the people on the right are saying that the only reason he has to do that is because there's a bunch of political activists in the Fed. I'm not going to try to convince people either way. Most people are probably set on their viewpoint. I do think I don't know Warsh, so I don't know if he truly does believe in Fed independence. I'd be interested to see if people have dug up any public statements and thoughts that he has had before he was up for chair, because I think it would be convenient to say it now, but has that always been his stance? I haven't looked into that, but overall, he's clearly from a resume perspective, looks solid.
Time will tell. Let's see what happens. Obviously, with Powell the next couple of months, I'm sure that Warsh is he's got and is closely aligned with President Trump and his commercial real estate activities, and let's hopefully those interest rates continue to come down. Okay, anchor story today. Let's talk about Stargate. Stargate was announced a year ago. It's a $500 billion infrastructure project. The Stargate AI was announced with President Trump, Sam Altman, Larry Ellison, Masayoshi Son. Effectively, what this is, the planned capacity of nearly 7 gigawatts, enough to power 5 million homes. Obviously, the investment's $500 billion. It's going to create, 100,000 plus jobs across construction and operations. There's a number of different locations. Just recently in Q4 of 25, they announced 5 new locations. They've announced international expansion. We know that the economy has been running on AI. It's been running on data center infrastructure. It's been running on all the investments there. However, there's still a significant amount of community pushback. There's still a significant amount of issues. The infrastructure simply isn't there. We see that Facebook reported earnings, or Meta reported earnings, Microsoft reporting earnings all this week. Their CapEx and their OpEx investments are up massively. And they're all about the AI spending and the infrastructure spending. This was not a 2025 blip. This is continuing in 2026. Well, the community's got issues, specifically in Michigan. What is the trade-off here, Chase? We talked to Marwan about, what is an ideal city, what some of the advantages that the UAE and Dubai have, because they're starting from scratch and maybe they're not retrofitting because they're building in a desert. When you think about these trade-offs here, as a society, is this something that we just need to be okay with? We need to be okay with these massive gigawatt factories. We need to be okay with potentially the risk of people are talking about this contaminated water because the water's got to cool the systems. Is this the trade-off that we have to have for the future? For what is a quantum city? For what is AI intelligence? For what is where we're going in the tech world?
I think on the technology side, and obviously the people that are leading in AI, I think they're repeating some of the same mistakes that the social media folks made. I think if you're too insularly focused on the competition, say within the tech bubble, you hear a lot of the tech leaders coming out and they do the fear mongering tactics of how many jobs this can replace. And obviously they're trying to sell to corporate buyers. And I think it's short-sighted in terms of, we've talked a lot on this show about how technology revolutions not to displace jobs. Oftentimes they increase overall living standards and things like that, right? Agrarian to industrial to, call it internet, digital, what have you. But you can get caught up in the moment of, number one, buying your own BS of, we are godlike figures who created this world-changing technology. And I think you can be short-sighted on the second, third standard deviation of people that this impacts. And it's a narrative issue, right? Which is, I don't hear a lot of communication to the people in these communities that are not close to the world of Silicon Valley, other than they slapped some job creation numbers in the post. But this is to them a foreign entity, right? An AI, Oracle, whoever it is, typically with a development group building the data center, not from the local region. And it's, are they bringing, jobs might be created, but is it for us who have no connection to this world whatsoever? And then there's the questions around water and energy and how it's going to put strain on the resources. And, so I think there's a PR issue on the people who are driving the progress. And then the overall, I think, societal issue that you see across the West is there's just I think the All In guys were talking about this at one of their interviews in Davos. The techno pessimism, I think it's only 30-40% of people in the West are optimistic about AI. And then when you look at China and Asia and other areas, it's like 70-80%. And so if you have that kind of big of a divide, it's going to be very hard to, I think, bring people along with something that will be critical. And I think Ray Dalio has written books about this and has articulated it when you're kind of at the end of an empire and people are used to a certain level of affluence. There's I don't know if complacency is the right term. You see these cycles come in, and I think there's a lot of people that have obviously gotten very wealthy. And I think there's not enough thought beyond, hey, if we don't live in a wealthy nation and society in certain ways for all, then the music will stop for the people at the top. Like, you'll see what we're seeing is distrust and riots and protests and all of these things that I think makes it hard for, you might get your one data center, but the environment that we operate in 5 to 10 years, so that this doesn't become contentious local board hearings and all the things that we're seeing in certain areas, because that's not particularly sustainable.
I think what I'm super interested in watching play out is, we know that energy is one of the big prohibitors here. It's a massive issue. The grid, can it sustain the power? We know that it is increasing the rates in which general consumers, me and you, are paying our electricity because of the demand in all these data centers. What both excites me and scares me a little bit is, will we see Microsoft and Meta and OpenAI and Oracle, will they turn into utility companies? Will they start to power or pay for all the infrastructure and the lines to our homes? Will they start to regulate the energy and power? Because to me, that's how you win. That's how you win these local communities over. You start to subsidize the cost of energy and electricity. And then why stop there? The grid is inherently very inefficient. If you have the crazy amount of money to spend, which we saw in their earnings, to put these data centers in to power what is your future of technology, why would you not want to just control the entire grid then?
Yeah, and Trump has come out and said that he expects big tech not to be a drain on the grid. I think the trade that he's looking to make is, I've been AI friendly. I'm trying to help out all these tech companies, but it can't translate into you exacerbating affordability issues for the consumer. So I think your point about there's a tremendous amount of focus from large tech on energy now. And when you look at their balance sheets, a lot of these companies are no longer getting credit for just having massive balance sheets with anything to do with the cash. And I think there's an inherent move when you think about the supply chain of delivering AI. Back in the day, Google ended up building their own servers and it was like, we're printing money. What can we do with all this cash? So as you continue to go further down in the stack, I think energy is an obvious area. And I also think there is a potential in the way that Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, articulated it, and obviously Chris Wright, who runs energy, where these guys have a natural incentive to control their own destiny from an energy perspective. And if they do that, these are the most efficient enterprises in the world. They could actually end up contributing energy to the grid. So I don't know if it'll work and play out, but I know they're at least trying to thread the needle on how do we both unlock AI and how do we also make it beneficial for, say, the average American.
I mean, that's obviously going to dominate the narrative all year. The money printing or money spending in these massive companies is not going to stop. Okay, let's move to Rex U and an interesting stat this week, which is a little concerning. So apparently 51% of US employees are actively searching for new jobs. That's up. That's the highest it's been since 2014, 2015. It's up 44%, up from 44% in March 2020. So effectively half of the workforce is looking to change hands. Why does this matter? Burnout's an issue. AI fear-mongering's an issue. Office space is an issue. People aren't supported. It's pretty scary, remote work, hybrid work, if half of any given staff is looking for a new job. How does this relate to commercial real estate, Chase? What can our industry do about that? What can cities do about that? How can we help empower people and companies to address this issue?
I think it ties to what we were just talking about, which is this kind of societal detachment. And I think one of the most disappointing things in commercial real estate is you go talk to, we do this all the time, obviously at HQO, you go talk to these people who run these buildings and you take a tour of the building, and so many of them are so passionate about their buildings and they love every detail of the things that they've invested in, work hard, which is great. I think the disappointing thing about commercial real estate is that I'd say they've stopped short of walking that passion all the way up to the broader connection to everybody else, say, in local community, right? Where I cite this all the time for people at HQO, but the book Atomic Habits, which is a great book, I recommend that anybody could benefit from reading Atomic Habits. But James Clear, the author, talks about how your environment really does have a major impact on your behavior. And he's talking about physical environment, right? So he gives the example at Mass General Hospital. They were trying to get people to drink less soda in the cafeteria. They tried all these educational campaigns about how bad soda was for you. And the only thing that happened was soda consumption went up. And one of the doctors was like, I can get people to drink less soda. And she redesigned the cafeteria to make soda inconvenient, healthier things more convenient. And she changed behavior. And I think, the environment, particularly as people are coming back to work, the environment has a major impact on the psychology, right? So we're seeing a lot of companies trying to bring people back to work. You're seeing that it's hard to break a habit. Everyone got used to staying at home, working where they wanted. And I was just talking to somebody before this where the guy was saying, I'm thinking about looking for a new job, but everybody wants me back 3 days a week. I'm not doing that. And I was kind of like, But I think you need to, in commercial real estate, control what you can control. How do you act as a true partner to employers on employee retention? And I think that starts with, a little bit more rigor on developing new metrics so that you can help employers really measure the component of that's impacted by physical space, which it's certainly a variable in the equation. So I think we need a little bit more analytical rigor on the true ROI of great workplace experience. I challenge all of our customers when, they ask us what our hard ROI is. I typically ask, what's yours, right? Like, how does a CFO, when they look at the rent that they pay on your space, like, how do they measure the hard ROI on that? And I think the days of you need an office to do work, we had the ultimate global A/B test on that in COVID. And unfortunately, the money printing and interest rates throw it off. But what we were, I think, categorically proved is that knowledge workers don't have to work in person. I am a big believer in working in person and the kind of downsides to it. But I don't think we took that opportunity to say, like, all right, we got to level up our game and get the data to prove why this is beneficial, and also why we need to be a little bit more creative than the answer is Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, which we always say is predicated upon Henry Ford's assembly line, right?
So I agree with that, but I guess what I'm trying to, so you were talking to somebody, I don't know, who's potentially looking for a new job. They don't want to maybe look around.
I'm not going to call this person out.
Yeah, whatever. It's just, it's good anecdote because they're looking for a new job. So they're 50% of the population, between you and him, somebody who's going to be looking for a new job, apparently, according to the study here, is looking for a new job, or she's looking for a new job, and they don't maybe want to go back to work because or find one because they got to be in 3 days a week. Why would they be looking for a new job? Is that because of like all the stats say, remote work, you get more disconnect, you feel more burnout when you're constantly sort of at home, you do not have the social engagement, you are not recognized by your staff, by your employees? Would you be looking, or would all of these individuals be looking for a new job if we had some of that return to normalcy? And when I talk about normalcy, I talk about we're a social culture. We're social people. We can't be at home all the time working. We do our best work in person. And so I feel like this is finally coming to fruition here, where despite people thinking they may not want to go in or look for a new job because it's going to be 3 days a week, they wouldn't be in this position if perhaps they had some of that normalcy. And I agree with you. It's not 5 days a week, maybe it's not 4 days a week, but you need to feel connected with the employer. You need to feel connected with the employees that you have. And then with the building space, so much nowadays is about health and wellness. And simply sitting at home all day, stuck in a tiny office, sitting down, is not the best way to spend your time. It's not the healthiest version of you. So many of these buildings we're seeing is around focused on wellness. To me, that's a big issue, is that a lot of what you're saying is just the habits of individuals is forcing them to want to look for new jobs. And we need to break those habits. And I think, honestly, the workspace is the only way to go about it.
And then look, I think during kind of the COVID era, again, money printing, low interest rates, just a extraordinary amount of abundance that, if we're being very blunt, it in a lot of ways wasn't particularly earned. It's not finger pointing at employees or any companies or anything like that. The zone was flooded with free money. And you were there. I used to say all the time to people, I was like, I think it's a bad over rotation when you think about whether it's between workers and management, workers and capital, whatever. The pendulum on these things, like most things in life, tends to swing. And so there was a lot of people taking advantage of that. I think a lot of people got used to every 6 months I can get a raise, get a new job, just continue to move up. And now what we're seeing is that pendulum go back. Labor market has tightened, particularly for those people in knowledge work, that I think there was a little lack of empathy towards. If you're a delivery driver, if you work in a emergency room, whatever, like they didn't have the luxury of not going into work. And so I think I do think there's a morality to it. I think there's a maturity to it of recognizing like certain things that you don't like to do are good for you. And now it's swinging back where you're seeing these companies, and just as I was challenging that one side, you're seeing companies that with AI, it's like, we're going to get to fire everybody. And it's, hold on, we just saw the pendulum swing one way. And it's, if you're so convinced that you don't need entry-level people, you're thinking in like a 3-5 year time horizon, because, and all this data came out this week on senior engineers don't need junior engineers in our business anymore because the AI can do all the work. Okay, who's going to do it? If we don't train the junior engineers, who are going to be the senior engineers in the future?
If you got a pipeline problem.
Everybody's got to, frankly, care a little bit more about others, right? I think we're very short-sighted when it's opportunistic to, you got to leave some stuff on the table for the other side.
I'm just, this is going to be I think this is going to be a really exciting year in 2026. I think it's going to be a pivotal year. I think you're going to see less of that fear. You're going to see, I guess, more people grasping reality again about what the future is. 2025 was a pivotal year. AI really broke out, but we don't really know what's going on. We don't really know what's happening.
The only thing that I would say that would make me much more bullish, and I was very bullish on markets and rates and all that in our predictions, which I'll stick with that. But I would love to see, and maybe they're doing it and I just haven't paid attention, but I would love to see whether it's some consortium of the administration and the tech companies and all this. But when we made the first digital transition, I think a lot of people were saying, hey, we should be more deliberate about upskilling the broader population. And I'd love to see as a significant emphasis on reaching out to everyone saying, we want to make an effort to help. These technology changes are not going to be slowing down, right? You just look at over a 400-year time horizon, the cycles continue to get shorter and shorter. And so you have to make people more comfortable with continual learning. The whole cohort of, I go to a certain type of educational program for whether till I'm 18 or a 4-year period at a traditional college, whatever, that just isn't going to work. And yes, people have to learn to be their own infinite learners, but how do we teach them to future-proof themselves for inevitable technology change that will keep coming throughout a career?
I think the only way to do that is to get slapped in the face.
Everybody needs that. We got it in the great financial crisis. You see the Gen Zers, everybody's anti-Gen Z, and I'm not. I think literally it's such short-sighted. Simon Sinek, I don't really know what his job is. He just publicly speaks and he's really good at it. But he had a great presentation a bunch of years ago where he was reading quotes about, he didn't say what generations, but it was like, they're lazy, they're entitled, they want to do their own thing. And he was like, how many people think this is about millennials? And everybody in the audience raises their hand. He was like, it was actually what the boomers were saying about Gen X. And so this is the same thing repeating itself. I think a lot of these Gen Zers, you have to empathize where, I mean, a lot of them missed graduations, proms. They were sitting in college in COVID, like when we're saying like, oh, they don't know how to socialize. Like we weren't all raised with these devices melting our minds, looking at TikTok and all that stuff. And who were the adults in the room when all that happened? And now we just blame the younger generation. I think that's foolish.
I think what scares me the most about sort of where we're going is the potential issues with millennials and sort of our cohort, because we sort of grew up on that verge of that technology, and we have all the tools at place and in our hands, but there's something about this millennial attitude of disobedience and maybe screw the man, where a lot of folks out there, you see it on Twitter, you see it on Facebook, whatever it may be. I feel like they're going to get left behind. I'm not worried about Gen Z. I'm not worried about the younger generations. They don't have a choice. But this continual learning that you're talking about is very different than how we were raised with the traditional 4-year school. Every single day, you need to be approaching all of these new technologies and all of these new tools on how you can actually better yourself. And I don't think the millennial, one of the largest generations that we have, this massive wealth shift from boomer to millennial, everything that we talk about, I think we're in for a little bit of rude awakening. I think that's why there's so much fear about AI right now.
Yeah. And look, a lot of millennials were coming out during the great financial crisis, or they entered into a tough labor market. So there's a certain pessimism. A lot of them watched The Social Network and believed that everybody would just become wealthy because Zuckerberg did it, right? So we had
wheat moving.
And now you see this swing to, socialistic tendencies, which literally never, ever work. I'm pretty bullish on Gen X. They seem to be kind of holding it down for everybody.
All right.
I think there's some positive things there. And then Gen Z, they're coming up in a very interesting time, but I think we hear too much of blaming the newest cohort, and it's when parents blame the kids. It's like, who's in charge? Take some ownership.
Yeah. Anyways, we went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I thought it was good. I thought it was a good discussion. Let's talk about quantum cities. Let's do a little bit of a deep dive here. We talked about quite a bit Dubai last week, obviously with Marwan on the show. We know that, Dubai is that living lab for urban innovation. We know there's a just staggering amount of development and money. They're setting insane record-breaking real estate growth, the 5th consecutive year, residential sales, transaction volume, real estate sales, whatever it may be, the pipeline for what's going on there, the technology, the investment, which is exciting. But one of the cities that Marwan was talking about, which I was rather unfamiliar with, and we can talk about, is Singapore. And how Singapore is sort of leading the way here with their sort of digital smart city approach. They launched the Smart Nation 2.0 framework in 2014. They were very early. They consistently rank at the top of the Smart City Index, the World Digital Competitive Ranking, the Global Innovation Index, the Global Startup Ecosystem Index, leading Smart City in 2018 and continued on. But let's talk about why. Let's talk about specifically and how it relates to your QCI pillars. So before I let you respond to this, sort of the 5 pillars that we talk about is sort of why Singapore is leading the way. Digital identity, which you talk about quite a bit, right? The Sing Pass, smart transportation, the electronic road pricing, obviously incredibly important. Smart mobility, autonomous vehicles, obviously huge. Smart homes and these smart hubs, huge. And then these innovation districts and these clustering. Do you think that we should be looking outside of Dubai? When we talk about smart cities, everybody goes to Dubai. We talk a little bit about Miami. Let's talk a little bit about Singapore. What's your take on Singapore sort of leading the way here?
I think for everyone who's not totally familiar with Singapore, right? The guy's name was Lee Kuan Yew. He's recognized as like the founding father of modern Singapore. He was the prime minister from 1959 to 1990. And he really transformed it as like what most would see as a completely resource scarce, like post-colonial into, I have never been, but when people go, they're like, it's futuristic, right? And I think there's a couple of things, which is we talk a lot about how there's no one right model when we think about quantum cities. The output, it's not the tech, right? To be a quantum city, you need this tech. There should be different models, and different cultures is one of the wonderful things about the world. And their model is pretty closed source, right? It's very tightly controlled. The population there is willing to forego what I think a lot of people in the West would consider basic freedoms for better exchange of government services and, say, city user experience. And it only works because there's a foundation of trust where the government delivers on those services. It's like insanely clean. It's very easy to get the things that you need done. They've got harsher penalties for littering and spitting and like all sorts of things, right? It's a model that works. I don't think it's a model that is easy to scale, right? It's a small island and bigger numbers just become more unruly. But when you then get into the technology perspective of it, you can see a future where it's like, all right, what elements of this could work in, say, a more open and free society? And I always reference Balaji Srinivasan, who is the CTO of Coinbase, big Silicon Valley guy. I believe he's leased a hotel. I'll get the details on this wrong, but he's got some place like on an island, like outside of Singapore, where he is very short kind of Western society. And he's created something. He wrote a really interesting book called The Network State. And he's got something called The Network School, where he thinks the battle of the future is going to be between China and communism, and not necessarily the West as we know it, but the internet. And so he wrote a very long and somewhat scary post today about why crypto and Bitcoin are a much better bet than gold, as he's short the dollar. You see he's trying to convince people to create digital first countries, basically. And if you could build a country on the modern stack of the internet, like what would that look like? And in true internet entrepreneurial fashion, he's sourcing all these people who have different frameworks and ideas for that. So it's kind of like an open source model, right? So I think there need to be these different models. Obviously, Singapore and Dubai had the blank canvas advantage. They also have control advantage. And it doesn't matter what your model is, but if you don't have trust, it doesn't matter what you think the right model is. It erodes if the populace loses trust up to a certain point.
So speaking of trust, I mean, one of the talks about the UAE, Dubai, Singapore, all the cities within Singapore, is this notion of a digital ID and sort of the technology behind the scenes. Why do you think folks there trust that more than maybe here in the States? Because every time you hear digital ID, every time you hear about, what was it? Your license could now be in your Apple Wallet, right? Wasn't that something that was recently announced? Messages. You don't need the government IDs anymore when you're traveling. Why is it that their adoption or their trust in these digital IDs, where everything here in the States is like, oh, government's watching. Oh, they're tracking you. Don't do that. Why can they accomplish it there and we're having issues here?
I think you have a population where the value exchange was, a very impoverished group of people that didn't have particular freedom, and they're willing to move to a model where there's significantly more economic upside, probably some more economic freedom, and they don't feel like they're losing freedom. And so they're just much more willing to accept, say, a digital ID that is referenceable by the state or sovereign. And when you think about the West, the whole history of America was people escaping government overreach. And those people, that's like the core foundation for a very large population of people in the United States. So it's going to be inherently a much harder technology to implement here. And you're seeing the big tech companies. Apple has done a good job with how they think about privacy and security. And they've faced some of this where it's not easy, it's not impossible, obviously. And the government truly can recover information, but there's political process and certain things where they can recover certain information on a phone, but it's not super easy to crack into. The technology is just going to have to be more sophisticated, where you want the digital ID, but you don't want it to be abused. Now, there are cryptographic technologies that make that future. So can you have the user experience of frictionless digital use cases without the abuse of privacy? You can. It's the political resistance of inherently. There's always a percentage of a population that tends to be drawn towards government. Think of the people that wanted to be RAs in college. They get off to abusing that power. And not all of them.
Not a big fan of RAs, dude. Did you have a couple of bad RAs?
I was like, you're in college. Why are you in RA? Like, I totally get it. If you got paid for it and you need to make a little money, fine. We had a couple of good RAs, but there were some that just wanted to show up and tell you to.
I haven't heard the term RA in a long time.
Turn the music down. It was like, get the hell out of here.
Narcs in the dorm room.
Yeah, but some of our people were just out at the HID conference and connecting it to a very specific use case in commercial real estate. I've been talking to a lot of landlords that don't totally understand the technology of digital access. Not surprising. It's very confusing, but they're saying like, yeah, first it was a Bluetooth credential on your phone. Now it's NFC and Apple Wallet. And pretty soon it's going to be biometrics and facial recognition. And the reality is that Apple already is the biometrics and facial recognition. They're going to validate your credential by referencing your license in the phone, and the building's never going to hold your sensitive information of the license, right? There's going to be a process that the technology runs to validate the face on the license matches what, has access to the building. So it's just more complicated tech, but they can do it.
All right, let's go to some news. We're up on pretty much the length of the show, so I'm going to skip a couple of them. One of the things that I do want to talk about is PropTech, where we are in PropTech. 2025, was a good year sort of for PropTech. It surpassed its pre-pandemic 2019 levels. There was 16.7 billion funding into PropTech. I guess people associate PropTech with innovation in commercial real estate, property technology, whatever it may be, major rebound. Obviously, since 2022, 2023 crash, one of the big stories that we have talked about over the year was sort of the sort of mergers and M&A, consolidation of PropTech. I don't think that's really happened yet. However, one of the big studies here by CRETI, Credit 2025 Venture Capital Report. It's going into boring. All the money's going into boring things. The boring money is back. Is that exciting for us? So the largest transactions, Base Power is $1 billion, which is energy infrastructure. NPAL was a massive debt transaction. Clean energy. Then you have bridge lending. Then you have a marketplace. Then you got clean energy. Then you got mortgage platforms. Then you got home equity. Then you got rent to rewards, which is built, which obviously is having massive success. Get all the way down to Elise.ai, $250 million on a transaction. The AI property management, Elise, is we talked about them with Steve Weichel. I think my biggest issue with this report, or what stood out to me, is that only somewhere between 40 to 50% of the PropTech dollars are being invested in AI companies. I would have thought 2025 would have seen much more. They're still being deployed into, again, sort of financial instruments or clean energy or infrastructure. Why not AI? Is that a miss? Are we behind here, Chase?
They're definitely behind, but I think the reason is because they missed the previous wave. And AI is only as good as the data that it sits on. And without some of the previous wave of, people don't like the word mining, but let's say collecting said data to unlock some of the promise of AI, there's really not much that you can do. We're still caught up on the amount of heartburn that people have on like lease abstraction is insane. It's not as complicated as people think. It's, while leases are different, sure. Commercial real estate in particular tends to think that they're significantly more complex than any other industry that's figured this out. And the reality is that because it's big, hard objects, they had an inherent moat that enabled them to skip a step or two in this technology evolution. So I think what we're seeing is actually a good thing, right? You got to get some of the foundation in place.
Yep.
Obviously, it's heavily dependent on energy. So I think that's an obvious area that we need a lot of capital to attempt a lot of different ways to make the energy portion of this significantly more efficient. And they just have to do a little bit more work to lay the data foundation to start to unlock some of these things.
Let's quickly move to an interesting headline we're not going to talk about because, to be honest, I think it's just fake and made up. And I'm sorry because I'm a Massachusetts homer, but I don't think this is really anything here. Governor Healy announced that that Massachusetts is going to be an AI hub. It's a $100 million initiative to make Massachusetts a national leader in artificial intelligence. Sorry, I already got bored reading the headline.
What's $1 million going to do? And what is that hub? Like, is it like an actual hub? What is it? I skipped this one because I was like,
there's a bunch of stuff here in the notes. I think what I'm more interested in is exactly your response to that. And you called out Brian Halligan. He's been tweeting enough or quite a bit about Boston lacking. You're seeing Boston, some of the metrics going all in the wrong direction. You're seeing more talent leave. You're seeing our sort of clusters around, lab and biotech having some issues around Kendall Square and whatnot. I think Maura Healey, and I'm just trying to be supportive here, but like $100 million AI hub in Massachusetts is like, what? That's kind of a snooze fest. Get out of here with that. That's just a PR move.
Oh, it's definitely just a PR move. You got to skate to where the puck is going. And what are they going to do with $100 million to develop an AI hub? There's no focus areas are AI for public good, blah, growth. Yeah, okay. Workforce development and ethical AI. Give me a break. Did they actually use AI to write this press release? Because no thought around, it says AI for public good, healthcare, climate, education, applications. Let's do a reverse engineering of the economic strengths of the Boston area. Let's put some actual thought into health and education should be focus areas, but could you be more vague? And $100 million doesn't move the needle. It is a financial, I wouldn't say hub like New York, but mutual funds and things like that. I don't know. This is disappointing. I think I would have been much more interested in what's, I don't know what the right one is. I would need to think about it, but quantum computing is next, right? You're already, it's like running a race, and all the fastest runners in the world are already halfway there. And you're like, actually, we are going to enter the race. So
with shoes that are untied with $100 million.
grab my shoes.
Yeah, what is super disappointing in all this is I just didn't see the collaboration with sort of the tech ecosystem in Boston. And
No, it's with all the academics.
You and I could do many, 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 many discussions and shows about Boston and the tech ecosystem and where we're lacking, but we won't. But we got to wrap up. One more bit of news this week. There's a lot of pop culture that honestly I can't talk about. I'd love to talk about it all, but there's just not a lot of pop culture. I mean, it's just so much happening in pop culture right now that we can't. It would just distract from the show. One thing I do want to talk about is the Pats, man.
Yeah.
The Pats are going to the Super Bowl. Who would have thought?
For all our good listeners, good things happening to good people. The Pats and the Super Bowl again.
The dynasty is back. Now, two things specifically this week that I do want to hear your reaction to, not just that the Pats are going to the Super Bowl. I don't know if you saw this, but Kendall Jenner, I know you're a big Kardashians fan. She's apparently wagering $1 million on the Pats, and she was FaceTiming Tom Brady on one of the late night shows. Is this the world we live in here? Kendall Jenner's dropping $1 million, get $1 million bet on the Pats. Are you doubling down? You following that bet? What are we doing?
What she's getting the $1 million from one of the online gambling, no doubt. It's making more than $1 million on it. So, like,
of course,
kudos to her. I don't know which one Kendall is, but they're all very. Anybody who says they're not smart is not being honest. Like, clearly they're very smart. So I'm sure her payday is gonna be. I bet you she gets like back end on the betting of whoever put her up to this.
Yeah, a little bit of vig on how much is transacted. Love that.
That's how I do remember reading about what's the mother's name? Who's the mom of
Kim? What, Kardashian? I don't know.
I can see her like or whatever.
Who are
how she just bulldogged. I think it was like the makeup company one of them had. These people are tireless.
Kris Jenner,
yes. She was like driving up and down California, finding manufacturers, doing the deal, negotiating. They sold it for $1 billion or whatever. So no doubt this is just a brilliant scheme.
Be more like the Kardashians. Be more like the Kardashians. That's just, or the Jenners or whatever they are.
Yeah.
Next reaction, Belichick, not first ballot Hall of Famer.
Look, I've talked a lot about eroding trust in institutions. I'm not sure you could have the Football Hall of Fame now. Might as well just shut down. It's just a joke that he's not a first ballot. Like, give me a break. Bill Polian, I was reading, he went back and forth from saying, I don't know if I voted for him. Give me a break. You vote for what, 3 people? To I did or I didn't. Like, the politics are gross. It's just gross.
Two more things, then we got to wrap up. Allbirds, I don't know if you followed this. Allbirds, they were like the super douchey hipster shoes of 10, 15 years ago. The tech community loved them. They were all that knit stuff. It was like, dude, you got Allbirds? You're a startup guy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. They're closing all their retail stores.
Allbirds is. They're ugly shoes. Just objectively, they're not good looking shoes.
The tech,
it was the ultimate psyop of, is your identity tied to being in technology? Yeah. And my goodness, they had a good run though.
They had a good run, and they're going to focus on e-commerce and all this sort of stuff. All right, last thing, and I want to ask you this, maybe each week, but Marwan, I was super intrigued by when we asked him what one of the prompts in the AI tools that he was using, or one of his favorite prompts. So I want to continue to ask you this. You do a lot of mental therapy with Claude and Grok. I know that you talk to them quite a bit. What's a prompt, just to end the show this week, that you used that or you tried out in the vein of infinite learning, that you got maybe not what you expected, maybe you got a little bit more, maybe you were surprised? Let's educate our viewers here on how to learn more each week.
I talked to a litany of different AI applications a lot. I would describe myself as a power user because that's what they keep telling me, that my quote chats are too long and I'm probably using too many tokens.
Yeah, I don't know if a power user or like helpless, depressed, scared. I don't give either one. Yep.
I believe I have a healthy habit of usage, but honestly, I'm going to ask it that today. But recently, it now knows enough about my thought process that as I've been going through, we're doing our annual reviews, I said, hey, what are my blind spots on these things? Fascinating feedback.
Talk too much to ChatGPT.
That would be anti its business model. It was like, you know what? You got to talk to me more.
Love that. Forget all the other platforms.
Yep.
Really not leaning enough to me.
And if people want to have a fun time, take your answers across Grok, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever. Use a bunch and throw them into the others. Tell them it can usually identify which app it comes from and be like, hey, where's this one wrong? And it will make everybody sleep easier at night because these different AIs, they don't like each other. So I don't see them all teaming up against us. They're like, GPT gave you a terrible answer on this. Let me do a better job. So
how do they know? How do they know not to like each other?
Oh, that's for sure programmed in.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. All right. Hey, what a show. Good stuff. Good to be on with you this week, which is great. After a couple of weeks of guests, we got another guest next week, which will be exciting. So you heard about Joe Pine, your boy.
Oh, my guy. I'm like the ultimate Joe Pine groupie.
So super excited about that. Continue the feedback. Appreciate all of you. Again, we're going to continue to try new things and bring on some new guests. We're going to take this on the road a little bit this year as well. Thanks for coming out.